Well, good morning. My name is Lisa Graves, and I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Democracy, which was founded in Madison, Wisconsin almost 20 years ago this year. We are here to present a report to you to unveil our findings from almost a year's worth of investigation into the American Legislative Exchange Council, and we're joined today by Jay Heck from Common Cause, which has also worked extensively to help uncover what ALEC really is and what it has been doing in the Wisconsin Capitol and other capitals across the country. Today, we're unveiling a report, ALEC Exposed in Wisconsin, the hijacking of a state. We call this the hijacking of a state because we looked extensively at the ALEC bills that have been introduced, or the provisions of ALEC bills that have been introduced in the state of Wisconsin without any disclosure to Wisconsin citizens that they were based on bills that were pre-voted on by ALEC corporations, lobbyists for corporations, special interest groups, and lawmakers behind closed doors without any public or press present. This report goes through a number of bills that have been introduced in Wisconsin that bear traces of ALEC DNA, that reflect the ALEC agenda, and in numerous ways, Governor Scott Walker's agenda over the past year and a half tracks key portions of the ALEC agenda. Our key findings are that 32 bills or budget provisions that have been introduced in this past year and a half reflect ALEC model legislation. 21 of these bills were passed. 19 of them became law. Over $250,000 has been given to ALEC legislative members in the state by ALEC corporations through campaign donations since 2008. And nearly $500,000, $400,000, has been given to Scott Walker to his state account since 2008 from ALEC corporations. In all, 49 of the current legislative officials in Wisconsin, 49 of the current legislators in Wisconsin are ALEC members that we've documented. And at least 17 of those current members have received cumulatively thousands of dollars in what ALEC calls scholarships to travel to resorts out of state where corporations and politicians vote behind closed doors on ALEC model legislation, templates to change the law in this state and other states across the country. Now, ALEC describes itself as the largest independent group of legislators in the country. Well, I would say it's not that independent when 98% of its $7 million revenue comes from corporations, foundations, and sources other than legislators. Legislators pay $50 a year. In Wisconsin, some of those legislators have the taxpayer pay that for them. Today, we're calling on, and Jay will talk about this more, we're calling on Attorney General Van Hollen to investigate ALEC for lobbying in the state of Wisconsin. The fact is that ALEC is an organization whose agenda is to change the laws in Wisconsin and other states. It has actually reported to the IRS that it engages in zero lobbying, and yet it has produced nearly 1,000 bills, and numerous bills have become part of Wisconsin law. Under ALEC's bylaws, its leaders, its legislative leaders, have a duty to get its bills introduced in the state of Wisconsin, and its leaders have done so. The current leaders of ALEC in Wisconsin are Representative Robin Voss, Representative Souter, and in the private sector, their co-chair is Amy Boyer, who has been a lobbyist for Koch Industries and other energy interests in the state. So let me back up a second and talk with you about the story of our finding. Over a year ago, we were dismayed, along with many people in Wisconsin, by the sudden surge in extremely controversial legislation being pushed forward in the state in the aftermath of the 2010 elections. Many people in the state felt that the state had been hijacked by an agenda that they hadn't heard of before, that wasn't part of the conversation in Wisconsin in 2010 and in 2009 and before. What we came to learn from our investigation of ALEC was that right now, Wisconsin is a trifecta state for ALEC. Pardon me. Wisconsin is an ALEC trifecta state. The governor, Scott Walker, is an alum of ALEC. The head of the Senate is an alum. The head of the Senate is an ALEC member. The head of the House is an ALEC member. In all, the Assembly Speaker, the Majority Leader, the Senate Majority Leader, the Senate President, the Joint Finance folks, all of the people who are in key positions responsible for scheduling legislation and blocking legislation are ALEC members. When we look back at the press that had been covering parts of ALEC over the years, one of the things we discovered was that there was a significant report of a meeting that Scott Fitzgerald attended in 2010, which is part of the ALEC Summit. In Washington, D.C., they have an annual summit at the end of the year, as well as their mid-year summit. Scott Fitzgerald told a reporter for WisPolitics that, in fact, he had never seen so much excitement around the effort to basically attack unions. He said that he had never seen so much energy around the right-to-work laws. And so really what happened in 2010 was that after those 2010 midterm elections, ALEC legislators from across the country, including the Wisconsin delegation, went to Washington, D.C. and in essence got the marching orders for part of the agenda to move in this state, and that's what's happened. You can see that in Act 10, in the budget bill with key provisions to undermine the power of unions, and you can also see it in the most recent revelations about the right-to-work legislation that is sitting on desks here in the Capitol but has not yet been moved. And we know last spring when William Cronin, the professor from the university, suggested that perhaps ALEC was behind this agenda, there was a huge reaction from the Republican delegation here in Wisconsin attacking him and suggesting that he was politicized. In fact, that those allegations turned out to be fruitless. But William Cronin was onto something. And a few weeks later, the Center for Media and Democracy was contacted by a whistleblower who provided to us all of the bills that ALEC had approved by ALEC corporations and legislative members through its task forces. I have to say, as someone who has known about ALEC, I didn't know ALEC until I looked at those bills. When I saw the depth and breadth and duration of the agenda to change the rights of workers in this state, to change the rights of families in this state if their loved one is killed or injured by an ALEC corporation's product, to see the tax agenda, the budget agenda, to see those pieces of legislation in their full form, having been voted on by corporations and politicians at these ALEC meetings, it was stunning. It was shocking. And I have to say, as someone who has been a lobbyist before, one of the things that's astonishing about ALEC is that it's not just like any other organization out there. It's not even just like a lobbying organization. It's more than that. I've been in lobbying meetings, and I have never, not once, had a legislator tell me that I had an equal vote to them on whether this bill was going to go forward. But that's precisely what happens in ALEC meetings. As we document in this report, what happens at ALEC meetings is that ALEC corporations actually vote as equals with politicians. I know that I've said this a couple times because it still stuns me. I can understand why ALEC corporations want to have a more of a voice in our democracy. Certainly WMC has a huge voice in our democracy already through lobbying and other efforts. But what ALEC does is unique. What it does is it actually has legislators who are willing to debase themselves by giving corporate lobbyists, unelected corporations, an equal voice to themselves in templates to change our laws through ALEC. So there are other things that we didn't know about ALEC that we discovered in the process of our investigation. We figured out that the Koch brothers, that Koch Industries was a longtime funder of ALEC and a longtime leader of ALEC, that in fact the Koch family had bailed out ALEC about over a decade ago when it was on the ropes, gave them a loan of almost $500,000 to stay afloat. Koch Industries has been a chairman of ALEC's corporate board and has been a member of its board for almost 20 years. We learned, as I said, that it's not just an independent organization as it described itself. 98% of its revenue comes from sources other than legislators. That's not independent. And we learned about the true extent of the ALEC scholarship, so-called scholarship program. That's a program where corporate lobbyists in this state give donations to fund the travel of Wisconsin legislators to out-of-state resorts, to swank hotels like the Kierland Resort in Arizona. They make donations, and then the leader of the Wisconsin delegation, in the former case of Scott Fitzgerald and Mike Hibsch, those Wisconsin senators actually received a spreadsheet showing the income coming in and the legislators who were receiving the scholarships. And under ALEC's bylaws, those legislative leaders, currently Representative Voss and Souter, are charged with giving out those scholarships. And so you have a situation in which in Wisconsin, one of the states that has one of the toughest ethics rules in the country, the coffee cup rule, where people in this city can't buy a trip for legislators through ALEC's scholarship fund. ALEC legislators are traveling off to resorts where they are wined and dined at the corporate underwritten conferences, and they go off to cigar parties, baseball games, and hardly any of this is reported, if at all. As we've documented in our report, some members of the Wisconsin delegation don't report those gifts at all. I've gotten the 2-minute warning. Okay. So I would say just a couple of other things about ALEC that I want to make sure that that folks know. Since we launched this investigation last year, exposing the corporations that are the leaders of ALEC and the funders of ALEC, exposing the members of ALEC, documenting who they are, including the fact that while ALEC describes itself as a bipartisan group of legislators, when we took a snapshot of 104 of their leaders, 103 of them were Republicans as of July of 2011. We learned a lot about ALEC that just wasn't known. When we did our FOIAs, our open records requests here in Wisconsin and other states, we discovered how ALEC was actually lobbying for bills, how it was urging specific legislative language, how it was urging the introduction of specific acts in Wisconsin, including some of the acts that we detail in this report, including acts related to giving a tax break to fruit-flavored tobacco products that we believe are marketed to children, to basically make those products cheaper, bills to expand the school voucher program in Wisconsin, bills to expand so-called virtual education with kids at home on a computer, learning from some remote teacher outside of the classroom. We discovered an enormous number of bills that were being pushed by ALEC that were reflecting Wisconsin law, including the Castle Doctrine that has been so controversial. Parts of that doctrine are echoes of the ALEC bill, as well as other bills on labor and other issues. Also, the bills related to stopping President Obama's health care bill. When you look at the information in the totality, we think it's fair to say that ALEC has helped hijack Wisconsin. And we think it's fair to say that the people of Wisconsin have not been informed by their elected officials about the role of ALEC in these laws and where these laws are coming from. Bills to basically block the ability to use highway taxes and gas taxes in the state from being used for anything else didn't come up because Wisconsin constituents were calling for them or clamoring for them. They came up because they're part of the agenda of some of the biggest corporations in the world that fund ALEC, corporations like Coke and Exxon and BP and others. Our legislators are traveling out of state for the purpose of, they say, learning more about what's happening in other states, but really what's happening is they're being wined and dined by out-of-state interests to introduce bills that benefit those out-of-state interests here in the state of Wisconsin. And some of these legislators in this state house have taken such a dim view of Wisconsin ethics and Wisconsin open government records, open government laws, that they have not responded to open records requests. And some of them, like Representative Souter, have actually suggested that they don't have a single responsive record about ALEC, even though Representative Souter is in fact the state ALEC co-chair along with Rep. Voss. So you have a situation in which many facts, key facts, are being hidden from the citizens of Wisconsin about the agenda moving forward in this Capitol, an agenda that has been pushed forward and led by Scott Walker, an ALEC alum, and helped to make into law by ALEC leaders in this state, in both the House and Senate, in every key role in this legislative body. Jay Heck.
Thank you very much. I'm Jay Heck. I'm the State Director of Common Cause in Wisconsin and have been for the last 16 years. And I'm just honored to be asked to be a part of this. I'm in awe of the work of this organization. And it's appropriate that the Center for Media and Democracy is Wisconsin-based. It's based here in Madison. The people that work here are all from Wisconsin. Last summer, they issued a report which began to show the spotlight on ALEC all over the country, and today the long-awaited exposure of ALEC's involvement here in the state of Wisconsin, and it is extensive by any measure. I think Lisa and others who've looked at this would have to say that ALEC's involvement in the state of Wisconsin is very high, if not the highest of any state, certainly in the top 10 in terms of the involvement of legislators in the American Legislative Exchange Council. It's true that ALEC has been around for a long time, but it's only been in the last year or two that we've really seen the extent of their involvement and the tentacles that have been placed here in Wisconsin, and at a time when I think there's a great deal of concern on the part of many citizens about Wisconsin and the influences from outside of Wisconsin, whether it's during the current recall campaign and out-of-state special interest money that's flowing into our election, or in the case of ALEC, out-of-state influence through corporations on our legislation. And the fact that 49 of the 132 state legislators in Wisconsin are ALEC members is really quite an astonishing number in my view. The concern of Common Cause in Wisconsin and National Common Cause has been really in two areas with regard to specific things that we think need to be looked at. Number one, the attorney generals of every state in the United States, and today Attorney General Van Hollen, J.B. Van Hollen, are being asked to investigate whether or not ALEC is truly what it says it is, and that is a non-lobbying organization that is entitled to enjoy tax-exempt status in the state of Wisconsin. We know from this report and from documents that have been secured from ALEC through the Freedom of Information Act, but also a lot of documents that haven't been forthcoming, and National Common Cause and the Center for Media and Democracy are waiting for. We know that there is lobbying contact between ALEC and legislators. Why is it then that they don't register in Wisconsin as a lobbying organization? Why is it that they don't have to pay any sales tax on or taxes on their work here? My organization, Common Cause, consists of myself, a part-time staff member. We lobby as a C4. We're a 501c4. We, under the tax code, have to pay taxes because we lobby the legislature on issues like campaign finance reform or redistricting reform. Just a relatively few number of issues, but nevertheless we make contact with legislators. ALEC, I think, as this report and others have shown, is in contact with the very highest members of the Wisconsin legislature, and yet they are somehow able to be prevented or not have to file as a lobbying organization, but instead as a tax-exempt charity. I think that makes a mockery of our tax laws. The second thing I'm very concerned about, and the fact is that the Center for Media and Democracy have in March launched or already asked the Government Accountability Board to look at it, and GAB is a little busy right now, I understand that, but I hope it's something that they will look into shortly. And that is the whole question of how it is that these so-called scholarships are not a violation of the Wisconsin lobby law. As Lisa suggested, back in the 1950s, Wisconsin was the first state in the country to really come down on the connection between lobbyists and legislators with regard to providing something of value so that there would be influence. In many state capitals around the country, it's common for legislators to go out to dinner, to receive lavish gifts and trips all over the country, all over the world. But in Wisconsin, for 50 years, that has not been allowed. It is the cup of coffee rule. Anything beyond a cup of coffee you cannot provide to a legislator because it's something of value, and there would be a sense of being beholden. How is it then that ALEC is able to fly legislators and their families to posh resorts all over the country for the purpose of putting them together with corporate lobbyists and then having them hammer out these quote-unquote model pieces of legislation that are then sort of sent by the truckload all over the country for introduction into the legislatures of the 50 states. And obviously, as this report shows, quite a few of them have made their way into Wisconsin. So we would like the Government Accountability Board to take a renewed look at this particular, what I think is a violation of the lobby law and a mockery of our law. And then just let me say in conclusion, I think Wisconsinites need to be concerned about organizations like ALEC. For many years, legislators would go to places around the country to get together with other legislators, and it was through something called the National Council of State Legislatures. That's very different. I'm often asked by some of my friends who have a different view than me, why don't you go after the NCSL? Well, the difference is because when a legislator goes on an NCSL trip, it's paid for by the taxpayers. They have to submit it, and it has to be justified. The legislator, if he's going to go to Denver or whatever city he's going for an NCSL conference, has to be able to defend himself to his constituents by saying, yes, I used your tax money to go to a conference so that I could be better prepared in this area or I could learn more about this. But there's accountability there. With ALEC, there's no accountability. We don't know exactly how much money these legislators are reimbursed. ALEC itself says it doesn't supply scholarships, which is astonishing, but of course they do. So what we need to do is find out how the money is reimbursed to these legislators, and it would be very helpful, by the way, if the legislators themselves would be more forthcoming about how it was that they were able to go to Phoenix or New Orleans or many of the other places that they go to. I think Wisconsin citizens have a right to know that. So again, I'm honored to be here. This is great work that they're doing, and while we have great interest in many of the things contained in this report, it's obviously the 501c3, C4 controversy and the scholarships that today concern me the most. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So we'll open up for some questions, and I just wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping first. There are reports at the back along with the press release, and we know that ALEC spouses, the spouses of ALEC legislators, do often go to these resorts. They stay in the hotel room that's often paid for by the ALEC scholarship. They're wined and dined along with their spouses at meals and dinners and ball games. And there is subsidized child care for the children of lobbyists and legislators. There's a fee that's paid, but overall ALEC spends about $300,000 or more per year on child care services alone out of its $7 million budget. Some of which come from the legislators and lobbyists, but it's a pretty significant amount because you can see when you look at that what happens at ALEC resort meetings like the one coming up in Salt Lake City in July is that it's sort of a family vacation. And often it's a family vacation that these legislators could not afford on their salary to go off to a fancy resort, have the legislators' airfare paid by an ALEC scholarship fund, have the hotel taken care of, have all your meals taken care of, and be invited to the Diageo wine party, or be invited to the Reynolds Tobacco cigar party and drink and smoke at length for free and not come back and tell the people of Wisconsin that that's what happened. When you look at the ALEC legislation, and then we'll open it for questions, you can see a number of bills that really would have a shocking and devastating impact on Wisconsin families. Representative Zipper and Farrell introduced a bill that would basically bar Wisconsin families from being able to sue a drug manufacturer if the drug was approved by the FDA, with a narrow exception unless they could prove that there was some fraud in that approval. But you and I both know that every single year numerous drugs are recalled because they kill people, because they injure families. And what that bill would do, and that's not a bill that Wisconsin citizens are clamoring for, that's a bill that those legislators brought into the State House that's a model bill based on a model bill from out of state from big pharma interests that may want to sell those drugs here, but don't want to have the liability if their products kill or injure Wisconsin families. I think that's wrong. The agenda that ALEC has put forward is an extreme agenda. It's not like NCSL. NCSL is actually a truly bipartisan organization in which the heads of the committees rotate from Republican and Democrat every year. They don't have an enormous substantive legislative agenda because they are a bipartisan enterprise. And there's no indication that what I believe is one of the most pernicious aspects of ALEC, there's no indication that NCSL actually has legislators vote as equals with corporate lobbyists behind closed doors. Zero evidence of that. But we know through ALEC's agenda, through the library that we've exposed in our project called ALEC Exposed, where we hope you'll go and look at the bills. We've marked them up. You can see them for yourself. Oftentimes, the Wisconsin legislators who are ALEC members don't even bother to change the name of the bill. If you simply put a name of a bill into our search engine, you'll pop out with probably a bill that has nearly identical provisions to the ALEC legislation being introduced in this state without any disclosure. But when you look at the agenda that ALEC has put forward, it's not a moderate, mainstream agenda that is something that I think Wisconsin can be proud of. It's an agenda to basically block minimum wage and living wage laws. It's an agenda to block sick leave pay for workers, for low-wage workers. In fact, ALEC is trying to turn Scott Walker's effort to preempt cities from having sick leave policies into the part of the national agenda for ALEC. ALEC's agenda includes numerous endorsements of trade bills that ship Wisconsin jobs overseas. ALEC's agenda includes numerous ways to choke the ability of this government to raise revenue to serve the needs of Wisconsin citizens, including a bill that was introduced this past year to require a supermajority in the future to raise taxes in the state, which really allows a future minority to block the majority will to provide needed services for Wisconsin citizens. This agenda is extreme, and this extreme agenda represents the hijacking of Wisconsin by these out-of-state interests. And so we're open for questions.
I talked to an attorney that represents ALEC a few weeks ago. He said by the strictest IRS definitions, they're not a lobbying group. Do you have an attorney, or do you guys know that for sure the IRS definition of lobbying is different than what the definition of lobbying is in Wisconsin?
Well, I'll tell you that the federal definition of lobbying is quite clear, and it is about influencing the introduction or passage of legislation. It's a very straightforward definition of lobbying. I've operated under it for a number of years. There is no way to read that definition and believe that what ALEC is doing constitutes zero lobbying. We have documents from our open records requests in this state that show them asking for bills to be introduced. If that's not lobbying, I don't know what it is. Asking for them to push this bill in a particular way, if that's not lobbying, I don't know what it is. And the fact is that Common Cause filed not just an extraordinarily compelling complaint brought by one of the top tax lawyers and key TAM lawyers in the nation. They filed 47 pounds of documents from FOIAs and whistleblower information with the IRS, documenting over and over and over again what ALEC does. As someone who's been a lobbyist, I'll say I know lobbying when I see it, and this is definitely lobbying. And we'll be happy to provide you with some of the open records requests. We're still going through the thousands of pages that we received, but certainly on the effort to roll back the national healthcare reforms, the ACA, there are direct emails from ALEC asking for these bills to be introduced, and we'll provide those. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've documented in this state and other states numerous emails going to legislators asking for bills to be introduced.
Lisa, on the scholarships, now, I just want to make sure I understand. You said corporate lobbyists here in the Capitol are making contributions to ALEC. Here in the Capitol, meaning on the square. Right. Yeah. Right. Not right.
Right. So what we have is a document from an open records request out of Scott Fitzgerald's office that shows the money coming in from a lobbyist, a company that lobbies here in Wisconsin. We've got examples in the report, $1,000, $500 in this at the beginning of a year. And that money actually is transmitted, in essence, to a separate account that ALEC maintains. And then we see on that debit sheet, that debit and credit sheet, money going out to reimburse travel for Wisconsin legislators. So I don't know where they send their checks. We do know in one instance, with respect to pharma, an issue that we notified the GAB of earlier this year, that pharma, the trade group for the pharmaceutical industry, was asked to send over $350,000, a check for over $350,000 to a Wisconsin address for the ALEC Scholarship Fund. It went to the address of Amy Boyer's office. ALEC has said that only less than $4,000 or $5,000 of that was meant for Wisconsin. The rest was meant for other states. So I don't know how they transmit the check from Washington, D.C. Pharma down the street from ALEC headquarters to Wisconsin, to the lobbyist here, the state private sector co-chair for Wisconsin. Then the money goes back into an account that's held by ALEC, and then the money is distributed to ALEC legislators. But here's what we do know. ALEC's lawyers told Gab 2 years ago that it had nothing, that ALEC, that these scholarships were okay because they were all handled by headquarters, and that Wisconsin legislators had nothing to do with them, raising the money or the designation of the money. We know that that same year in 2010, ALEC provided a signed tax report to the IRS in which it said it engaged in 0 scholarships and would not report the amount of revenue or expenses of the scholarship fund because it said it had nothing to do with it. That was merely administered by the states and that they weren't responsible for reporting to the IRS about it. This is a stunning set of 2 different stories told to 2 different regulatory agencies that tell entirely the opposite story. What the open records request story tells is that Scott Fitzgerald was informed fully about the money coming in from Wisconsin corporations that have business before this state and knew precisely which legislators were getting those scholarships. In fact, under ALEC's bylaws, the state leaders of ALEC are the ones who designate which legislators get the reward of the subsidized trip to the ALEC resort meetings.
One lawmaker that I asked about this probably a year ago said that he didn't consider it a gift because he didn't know which lobbyist had given that money to him, that it was designated for him, and that he wouldn't know who to reward, so it wasn't a conflict of interest. Can you address that issue that he's saying it's not a gift? I don't know if he agrees with me.
Well, I would say, I guess, 2 things in response. The first is that it's quite clear that and in Wisconsin and other states, we know from other FOIAs that the legislative leaders do know who's giving the money. So the leaders of the state caucus know who's giving the money, and we know that some of those corporations ask for dinners and meetings with those legislators after giving the checks. We've documented that fully in Ohio. We haven't finished reviewing all the documents in Wisconsin. And as I said, we haven't received a single responsive request from Representative Souter's office. But we know that, pardon me, we know that some ALEC legislators do know which corporations are giving money for the scholarship fund. And we also know that when you go to those ALEC conventions, as Mark Pocan has attested, you're bombarded with basically a NASCAR-like operation with corporate logos for this dinner and that dinner. We have photographic evidence of the sponsorship of these events, the Time Warner baseball game, the Diageo wine party, the Reynolds tobacco party. So those are also gifts where the corporate name is known and notorious. In fact, the corporations pay a fee to have their name widely known by the legislators. With respect to the idea that the legislator doesn't know, it doesn't count somehow, I would say I certainly can't put money in an account at M&I Bank and have Representative Voss or Representative Souter then distribute that money to whoever they want for travel and say it's okay because they didn't know it was me. It's an absurd construction of state ethics law. It's basically laundering. And in fact, one of the ironies is we had a legislator who wanted to go to the ALEC conference in order to, from another state, in order to see what they were doing, and I couldn't pay for that legislator to go because my organization, a 501c3, just like ALEC, a 501c3, cannot give a gift to a legislator to cover their travel. And when that legislator goes and wants reimbursement through their campaign fund, I, as a 501c3, can't reimburse their campaign fund because it's their political campaign fund. And yet this is precisely what ALEC does through these scholarships.
What confidence do you have that Attorney General Van Hollen will take this seriously?
I'll turn to Jay for that.
Well, here's the thing. When I moved to Wisconsin in 1988, the big scandal at that time was the fact that 5 legislators had received a ticket to a Packers game, and several had received a train ride, I think from Milwaukee to wherever trains were going at that time, and not now. But that was front page news in Wisconsin. And it was because of this arcane, very folksy, down-to-earth law that we have that you provide nothing of value to legislators. So what I don't understand is how the Attorney General would be able to say, to look at these scholarships that are provided to legislators to be able to travel to places like New Orleans, Phoenix. I mean, they're never places like Kenosha or Wausau. I mean, they're always usually pretty nice places. So how is it that
Kenosha and Wausau here?
And I love those places, but I mean that's not where you're going to go for an ALEC conference. So I think on its face it would be worthwhile for the Attorney General just to investigate how it is that ALEC is able to provide these services. And secondly, if he is able to get the information, and this report and others hopefully will be able to provide at least some of it for him, to be able to see that ALEC has not lobbied for specific pieces of legislation, and how they are then able to escape having to be a 501, a C4 lobbying organization, then I think he's not paying proper attention to what he needs to be doing. And I might just say about the tax status and the being exempt from tax status. An organization like mine, Common Cause in Wisconsin, we lobby, so we're a C4. Now, we also do receive some foundation money for education purposes, and so we have a separate fund. It's called a C3 fund. But none of the money that I use from the C3 fund can be used for a lobbying purpose. Now, if ALEC's lobbying, they haven't even gone through setting up a separate lobbying organization in order to expend funds to influence legislators. They're claiming that they don't lobby. They're claiming that all of their money should be tax exempt because they're not a lobbying organization. And this report and all the evidence suggests that that's not the case. So I would just hope that the Attorney General would look at the evidence that's presented to him and make a judgment about whether or not this is something that ought to be investigated.
And I would add, I certainly hope that Attorney General Van Hollen would rise above his partisan roots and serve his role as the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Wisconsin and investigate the evidence that we're providing. We think it's significant evidence, and the evidence that Common Cause has put before the IRS is substantial. And we also have a number of other examples of where ALEC talks about these bills. ALEC lives primarily to produce these bills, to get these bills introduced and enacted. And the bulk of its work at its task force meetings are all about these bills. That's what it does. It produces, it has ALEC corporations and sometimes legislators bring bills to these meetings to be ratified as templates for the nation and to be put forward. And ALEC routinely produces scorecards, which is mostly done by legislative organizations, but not exclusively, about how well they're doing. They extensively track the bills, and they send information to legislators to try to stop other bills from being introduced. I think we have a strong case on this, and we even have some of the ALEC representatives on video talking about, quote, lobbying for liberty. They have said that they've lobbied, although they told the IRS that they do no lobbying, and they've told Wisconsin, in essence, they do no lobbying. We strongly disagree.
The Souter stuff that you're talking about, have you made a formal FOIA for that information, or was this just a request? We
filed a formal open records request under the state statutes. Brendan actually filed it, and he's taking a picture right now. Brendan Fisher filed that request, and he responded that he had no responsive emails in either his official state email or any other email account, even though he is the Wisconsin legislative leader, co-leader for the state for the past 12 to 16 months since Fitzgerald stepped aside and Hibsch went over to the Department of Administration. Yes?
Do you have any numbers on per year averages that legislators are getting in scholarships? I'm sorry. We don't have that averaged out, but we do have the documents that show the scholarships the money coming into Wisconsin for legislators and going to Wisconsin legislators in the years 2006, 2007, 2008, and most of 2010. We don't have part of 2011, and we don't have 2011 and 2012, but we do have numbers that you can see the actual payments being made to Wisconsin legislators. I think we have. I mean, we do have some of that documented in the report. Sorry, in the back of the report, we have. Pardon me.
actually in the middle of the report. I won't tell you the page, but there's a page basically where we go through member by member and talk about how much they received in ALEC scholarship funds. So, for example, Scott Fitzgerald, he was the state co-chair in 2010 and 2011. He was actually the co-chair earlier in Wisconsin history, and he was also on the controversial public safety and elections task force. He has received over 3,800 in 2006, 2,000 in 2007, 1,000 in 2008. Now, Fitzgerald has reported some of this. Actually, he's one of the only ones who's reported it. He's reported it as honoraria as opposed to scholarships. Other legislators have reported, other legislators such as Leah Vukmir have reported receiving scholarships. She received 2,400 approximately in 2008 and 2,000 in 2009 and 2010. And she introduced over 10 ALEC bills. You also have a situation with Alberta Darling, who we have no information about scholarships for her, but she introduced 14 ALEC bills or ALEC-related bills. So there is detailed information in here about the particular task forces that ALEC members are on. It's quite extensive, as well as the scholarships that they've received. One of the charts in here gives you an actual summary for 2008, so you can see the money coming in from Eli Lilly, from Xcel Energy, from Wisconsin Cable Communications, Miller Brewing Company, and others. And you can see the money going out to legislators like Frank Lassie, to Leah Vukmir, and others. So that information is documented in here. Because the spotlight has been shining on ALEC in the past year with our project, as well as with the increased media attention following the terrible tragedy of Trayvon Martin's shooting in Florida and the invocation of this Castle Doctrine Stand Your Ground law as a basis for preventing even a full investigation and indictment in that case previously, ALEC has been receiving increased scrutiny. And in the wake of increased scrutiny over its efforts to push the Castle Doctrine bill across the country, including in Wisconsin, where it was adopted in part, the voter ID legislation, which was adopted here in Wisconsin as well, which tracks and resembles the ALEC voter ID bill. In response to that increased national spotlight, over a dozen ALEC corporations have left, including Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Procter & Gamble, and others. And over 40, actually 45 legislators, Republicans and Democrats and other states than Wisconsin have left ALEC and resigned their membership. Yes?
Have you seen any link between campaign financing and spending going up to regular channels after ALEC's sponsored legislation has been passed by legislators?
I don't think we've tracked it in a temporal way like that. We do show that it is the case that some of these corporations that have business before the state are giving money to these legislators for their campaign funds, and they're also pushing for the ALEC bills. What we do know in a particular instance is that in the case of Time Warner, not in this legislative cycle, but in a previous legislative cycle, they had a bill before the Wisconsin legislature that they were very interested in. They sponsored at the ALEC convention in Cincinnati in the spring of in the spring of 2011, right? They had the ball game, the Major League Baseball game, and then the legislators here in Wisconsin and other states went back and supported the Time Warner pushed bill on cable issues. And Brennan is telling me that I'm correct on that, right? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say something in defense of Wisconsin legislators with regard to model legislation. They did take the voter photo ID bill, which was an ALEC model, but they deemed that it wasn't restrictive or extreme enough. So in Wisconsin, it was changed.
On the Castle Doctrine,
yes.
Is there any sort of connection that you're aware of? For example, is the NRA a member of ALEC? Talk about that. Yes,
so this is a bill that the Center for Media and Democracy has documented extensively. We were the ones that helped break this story nationally. The original Castle Doctrine was conceived of by the NRA's lobbyist, Marion Hammer, in Florida. She's the former NRA president. In 2004, she thought this would be a great bill to move forward. She approached two ALEC legislators in Florida in 2005, in the Senate and the House down there. They introduced that bill. It was passed by the Florida legislature and signed into law by Jeb Bush. Then that lobbyist, Marion Hammer, traveled to an ALEC convention in Texas in 2005 in the summer. She introduced that bill and proposed it as an ALEC model. That particular task force, which was then known as the Criminal Justice Task Force, was co-chaired by Walmart, the largest seller of ammunition in the United States and indeed the world in a retail sense, and the largest seller of long guns in the United States. Marion Hammer reported back to the NRA at the time that that bill was well received and unanimously approved by ALEC's task force, which means it was approved by the public sector and private sector members, its corporate lobbyists, and special interest groups, as well as the legislators. That was the summer of 2005. Since that time, that bill has sped across the country in various forms. Some states have adopted it in whole. States like Wisconsin have taken 2 of the 3 parts of that bill. We know that the NRA is a longtime member of that task force. It actually then subsequently co-chaired that task force in 2008 and 2009 for ALEC. The NRA has also put forward a number of ALEC bills over the years, including expanding concealed carry, which is one of the bills that was introduced here in Wisconsin. We recently issued a report this week that I wrote that extensively details the NRA's involvement in ALEC over the past 20 years, as well as Koch Industries' involvement in ALEC in that same time frame. And so you can see bill after bill after bill that was put forward. One of the bills that was just pushed within ALEC this last winter was a bill to change the bar on cities having their own gun laws and cities suing manufacturers of guns and other weapons. It was a bill to change that, an amendment to change that by the NRA so that cities couldn't ban machine guns and couldn't ban cop killer bullets or any ammunition, basically. That bill is an ALEC model bill. So the NRA is extensively involved in ALEC. Now, ALEC has said last month that it was disbanding this particular task force due to the controversy. The former chair of that task force, Jerry Madden, a representative from Texas, told one of the local reporters that it wasn't really disbanded, the work would continue in other ways. Are there other questions? We do have bills side-by-sides for you if there are some that you are particularly interested in looking at. And we do have the extensive library of resources about ALEC at ALEC Exposed. That includes detailed information on ALEC's funding, comparisons to the National Conference of State Legislatures and others, details about all the corporations and politicians that are involved in ALEC, the ALEC leaders, as well as information about ALEC think tanks. We do have a detailed section in here talking about some of the allies of ALEC in the state, including the McIver Institute, and the Bradley Foundation, and Americans for Prosperity in Wisconsin. And so AFP is active in ALEC. The Koch brothers, Koch Industries, are both represented on ALEC's board and through organizations that they fund that are part of ALEC, like the Cato Institute, as well as Americans for Prosperity, which, as you know, has been very active in this state. And so there's more information about those entities as well at the end of this report. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very interesting.